The fall of Rome wasn't a sudden catastrophe, a singular event that brought a mighty empire to its knees in an instant. It was instead a slow, tragic unraveling, a gradual erosion of the foundations upon which Roman power and influence were built. By the time the so-called barbarians arrived at the borders, eager to claim new lands and resources, the Western Roman Empire was already a hollow shell, a ghost of its former glory, weakened from within. Its institutions, the venerable Senate, once the heart of Roman governance, the complex system of taxes designed to fund the empire's vast endeavors, and the mighty army, remained in form, preserved in appearance, but their spirit and purpose, the very essence that had driven Rome to greatness, had faded, leaving behind only empty rituals. The Senate's debates were empty rituals, devoid of real power or influence, mere echoes of past glories. The burden of taxes crushed the poor, creating widespread resentment and instability, further weakening the empire's social fabric. And the army, once the most formidable fighting force in the world, was a shadow of its former self, plagued by corruption and internal strife. The sense of shared Roman identity, that unifying force that had bound the empire together for centuries, had fractured, replaced by local loyalties, petty squabbles, and a general sense of apathy towards the fate of the empire. People no longer felt part of a grand Roman project, they felt disconnected, alienated from the centers of power. The empire was simply too vast and impersonal, too unwieldy to inspire genuine loyalty or a sense of common purpose. So when the end finally came, it wasn't a murder, a violent act of destruction, but a burial. The final, somber act for a body long dead, a civilization that had slowly withered away from within. The so-called barbarians didn't destroy Rome with a single blow, they simply inherited its ruins, stepping into a power vacuum left by a dying empire. Understanding this slow decay, this internal weakening, is absolutely key to grasping the true story, the complex and nuanced narrative of Rome's fall. It's not a simple tale of conquest and barbarian invasions, but of internal collapse, a gradual disintegration from within, and a magnificent shell, a breathtaking testament to past glory, left behind for future generations to admire and ponder. The traditional narrative often paints a picture of barbarian hordes sweeping in and obliterating the Roman Empire, but the idea that barbarian invasions alone destroyed Rome is a myth, a simplification of a much more complex historical process. External threats from Goths, fierce warriors from beyond the empire's borders, Vandals, known for their ruthlessness and destructive tendencies, and Huns, the nomadic horsemen who terrorized much of Europe, certainly accelerated the collapse. Their raids and incursions put immense pressure on Rome's already strained resources, but to lay the blame solely on these external forces is to ignore the deep-seated problems within. Rome's real enemy was itself. The empire's strength had eroded from within, like a magnificent building slowly crumbling from neglect. Rampant political chaos, a spiraling economic ruin fueled by inflation and overspending, and deep social division between the wealthy elite and the impoverished masses left it vulnerable to any external shock. For centuries, Rome skillfully managed its borders not just through military might, but through diplomacy and alliances with various tribes. It was a delicate balancing act, not just war. Many so-called barbarians were not simply invaders, but longtime allies, trading partners, and even contributors to Roman society. Some even served with distinction in the Roman army, rising through the ranks and holding positions of power. Their migrations were often driven by their own internal crises, such as famine, overpopulation, or pressure from other migrating groups. They weren't necessarily driven by a singular unified desire to destroy Rome and its civilization. Blaming the barbarians for Rome's fall is mistaking the symptom for the disease, focusing on the external actors while ignoring the internal decay. Rome fell not because it was strong and then suddenly overwhelmed, but because it was already weakened from within. It wasn't a sudden collapse due to being overwhelmed by sheer numbers, but a gradual decline. The final conquests were often not violent takeovers, but peaceful transfers of power, agreements made to fill a void. These transfers occurred in areas where Roman authority had already vanished, leaving a power vacuum. The end of the Western Roman Empire was not a heroic last stand against insurmountable odds. Instead, it was a quiet surrender to the inevitable, a recognition of a new reality where Roman power no longer held sway. Rome's collapse was rooted in economic failure and political dysfunction. The empire's wealth once came from conquest, but when expansion stopped, crushing taxes became the only way to fund the state. The rich dodged taxes, leaving the burden on the poor and small farmers, destroying the middle class. Politically, Rome was paralyzed by civil wars and rapid turnover of emperors, making stable governance impossible. Corruption and self-interest replaced loyalty to the state. Desperate measures like debasing currency led to inflation and barter. Trade networks broke down and the machinery of the state ground to a halt. Rome was undone not by invaders, but by its own contradictions. Rome's army, once its greatest strength, became a symbol of its decline. The citizen soldier gave way to paid professionals and foreign mercenaries with little loyalty to Rome. As small farmers vanished, recruitment shifted to the provinces and eventually to entire barbarian tribes. These new soldiers fought for pay, not patriotism, and their allegiance was to their generals, not the empire. Rome even hired former enemies, Goths, Franks, Vandals, to defend its borders. The army became Roman in name only, its loyalty transactional and fleeting. When the state couldn't pay, mercenaries mutinied or switched sides. Barbarian generals like Stilicho and Ricimer became kingmakers, wielding real power. The legions were no longer defenders of Rome but strangers and undertakers of the empire. The transformation of the army sealed Rome's fate from within. The sacks of Rome, most notably those led by Alaric and later by Odoacer, weren't triumphant displays of conquest, showcasing military might and territorial expansion. Instead, they served as stark and unsettling signs of Rome's growing impotence, revealing a vulnerability that had been festering for decades. Alaric, a man who had once served within the Roman military ranks as a general, led his Visigothic forces to sack Rome in 410 AD. His intention was not to obliterate the city, reducing it to rubble and ashes, but rather to compel the Roman authorities to grant recognition and provide essential resources for his people, the Visigoths, who sought a permanent settlement within the empire. The city was subjected to plundering, its wealth and treasures seized, but remarkably, its citizens and its numerous churches were largely spared from the widespread destruction that often accompanied such events. Alaric's primary objective was to achieve legitimacy and secure a future for his people, not to inflict utter ruin upon the city of Rome. The truly shocking revelation was the extent of Rome's helplessness in the face of these events. The once mighty legions were conspicuously absent, deployed elsewhere to defend other threatened borders, and the government seemed paralyzed, unable to effectively respond to the crisis. Then in 476 AD, Odoacer, at the head of an army composed predominantly of Germanic soldiers, quietly and without significant resistance, deposed Romulus Augustulus, the last emperor of the Western Roman Empire. Remarkably, there was no major battle fought, no widespread destruction or burning of the city. It was simply a peaceful and largely uneventful transfer of power from a Roman emperor to a barbarian general. Odoacer, demonstrating a degree of pragmatism, chose to maintain the existing Roman administrative structures, allowing them to continue functioning. As a result, the daily lives of most people within the city and its surrounding territories remained largely unchanged, with little disruption to their routines. The position of the Western Emperor had become increasingly irrelevant in the face of the shifting power dynamics. The true authority and control had in reality shifted to other hands long before this final act. Therefore, the fall of Rome was not a sudden cataclysm, but simply the final formal admission that the once mighty Roman Empire had reached the end of its natural life, and its corpse was ready for burial. The end, when it finally arrived, was anticlimactic and subdued. It was a quiet and almost unnoticed, close to a long and protracted period of decline, a whimper rather than a bang. The so-called barbarian kingdoms didn't destroy Roman civilization, they preserved and transformed it. Germanic rulers admired Rome, adopting its laws and administration, and even its language. Kings like Theodoric the Great repaired Roman infrastructure and patronized Roman scholars. They governed from Roman palaces, issued Roman-style coins, and kept Latin as the language of power. The new rulers saw themselves as heirs, not conquerors, blending their customs with Roman tradition. While society became more localized and agrarian, the core of Roman culture survived. The Barbarians became the bridge between the ancient and medieval worlds. Rome's light didn't go out, it was carried forward in new hands. Even after the empire's fall, its influence did not simply disappear. The very idea of Rome lived on, a powerful concept that resonated through the ages. Charlemagne's coronation as Emperor of the Romans directly revived the Roman ideal, seeking to emulate its glory. This inspired the formation of the Holy Roman Empire and countless other rulers across Europe. The Roman Catholic Church played a crucial role, preserving Latin, Roman law, and administrative practices, significantly shaping the development of medieval Europe. Roman law, its distinctive architecture and its groundbreaking ideas about citizenship, continue to influence our societies and legal systems even today. Rome's collapse was more of a slow, fading process rather than a sudden and catastrophic end. Its true strength resided in its strong social cohesion and a shared sense of identity. And when those vital elements vanished, the empire ultimately became a mere shell of its former self. The barbarians, therefore, didn't truly kill Rome. Instead, they inherited and adapted its enduring legacy. The very idea of Rome continues to endure, profoundly shaping the world long after its physical fall from power.